The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of jazz floated through Mays and Lenox, Manhattan's most exclusive dining room. But tonight, all of it was drowned out by a sound no billionaire could silence, a baby's cry, sharp, relentless, shattering the polished air of quiet elegance. At the center table, under the weight of 100 eyes, sat Richard Langston, tech titan, billionaire CEO, a man who could bend markets with a single phone call. Yet here he was, helpless. His 11-month-old son, Theo, writhed in his arms, red-faced, inconsolable. Richard whispered, bounced, pleaded under his breath, but nothing worked. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room judged him, not as a business giant, but as a father failing in real time. "Get that crying baby out of here. This isn't a daycare," someone hissed from a corner table. Laughter followed, brittle and cruel. Richard's throat tightened. He'd faced boardroom betrayals, media scandals, billion-dollar losses. None of it compared to this moment, public humiliation. Wrapped in his child's grief-stricken wails, and then just as the tension peaked, a figure stepped forward from the shadows of the dining floor, a waitress, young, black, calm, and everything was about to change. Richard Langston was a man used to control. His life was meticulously organized by calendars, precision, and the kind of efficiency that made him a legend in corporate America. But tonight, in the gold-lit halls of Maison Lenox, control had abandoned him. Theo screamed in his arms, fists pounding tiny, desperate protests into his father's chest. The sound cut through Richard's composure like glass against stone. He tried every move he'd seen his late wife do, rocking side to side, humming softly, even whispering promises he knew an infant couldn't understand. Nothing worked. The diner's silence was louder than the baby's cries. Faces turned with that particular look the wealthy had perfected, a mix of superiority and disgust. The kind that reduced a human struggle to an inconvenience. Richard's jaw tightened. He had buried his wife just 3 months ago. Since then, Theo had cried often, sometimes for hours. And no matter how many zeros decorated his bank account, there was no nanny, no gadget, no consultant who could ease the ache of a child who'd lost his mother. But none of that mattered to the room. To them, Richard wasn't grieving. He was failing. Near the back, balancing a silver tray that shimmered under chandeliers, Amara Johnson noticed it all. She'd worked enough shifts to read the room like a book, the tapping feet of impatient diners, the sharp glances slicing toward the crying child, the whispers rising like smoke. She took a slow breath. She knew this scene all too well. A woman at table 4 leaned into her husband, her voice dripping disdain. "What kind of man brings a baby here?" Honestly, the words weren't meant for Amara, but she heard them. She always did. Just like she always heard the muttered comments about her hair, her skin, her very presence in this gilded space. Tonight was supposed to be a simple shift, pick up some extra money before her psychology midterm. But the tension at the Langston table pulled at her like gravity. She steadied her tray, forcing her expression neutral, her movements professional. She'd been taught since childhood to walk with dignity, no matter what the world threw at her. But something about the billionaire's breaking facade and the baby's raw, piercing grief made her hesitate. Should she step closer? Amara had been here before, not in Maison Lenox, but in spaces where grief screamed louder than words. Every summer since she was 16, she'd volunteered at a children's grief camp. She remembered the trembling hands of kids clutching photographs of parents they would never see again, the way silence could break them more than tears. She had learned then that sometimes the most powerful thing you could offer wasn't a solution, it was presence. That was why, even now, as a waitress in borrowed heels that pinched her toes, she noticed details others missed. There was a slight tremor in Richard Langston's hand as he held the bottle of sparkling water. The redness around his eyes was concealed, but not erased by wealth. The way his shoulders sagged each time Theo's cries rose higher, like a man silently begging the world for mercy. But mercy was in short supply here, At table 7, a patron's voice cut across the tension. If this were my staff, they'd be fired already. Can't they keep things under control? The man wasn't looking at Richard. He was looking at her as though a crying baby was somehow her fault. Amara swallowed, setting her tray down with the same precision her mother once taught her. Don't let them see you flinch, baby. Dignity is your armor. The irony wasn't lost on her. The billionaires could cry, rage, or crumble, and the world would bend to accommodate them. But for her, a young black woman in a pressed uniform, any crack in composure could cost her a paycheck. Still, she felt the pull. Theo's cries weren't just noise to her. They were echoes of every grieving child she'd ever held. She shifted her weight, torn between the professional distance her job demanded and the human instinct screaming at her to step in. Meanwhile, Richard was unraveling. His expensive watch glinted under the chandeliers as he rubbed his forehead, trying to think past the noise. He could negotiate mergers across continents, stare down hostile investors, and command entire industries. But his son? His only child? He was powerless. And in that helplessness, for the first time in years, Richard Langston looked less like a titan of industry, and more like a man on the verge of breaking. Amara gripped the edge of her tray, heart racing. She could keep walking, pretend this wasn't her battle. But deep down, she already knew the truth. This moment was choosing her. Amara hadn't planned on being here tonight. She was supposed to be at the campus library, reviewing case studies for her psychology midterm. But tuition bills didn't wait for exams, and when her manager called at the last minute, she slipped into her uniform and caught the subway. Every dollar mattered. Between textbooks, rent on her tiny studio in Harlem, and sending a little money home to help her grandmother with medical bills, Amara lived in the razor-thin space between exhaustion and determination. Her classmates saw her as quiet, always slipping out early to work another shift. What they didn't see were the nights she studied on the train, the mornings she soothed her own ache of loss before putting on her professional smile. Her mother had passed away when Amara was 15, cancer, swift and merciless. In the years that followed, she'd learned to fold grief neatly into her daily routine, the way you fold a letter you can't bear to throw away. It was that history that drew her toward psychology, the hope that she could one day help others hold their pain without being broken by it. Now, watching Richard Langston in his $1,000 suit struggle with something as primal as fatherhood, she felt an unexpected pang. Grief recognized grief, but the room saw none of that. At table 2, a woman's sharp whisper carried, "Honestly, they'll let anyone work here these days. Standards are slipping." Her eyes flicked at Amara, then away, as if she were disposable, invisible. Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to remind them that she wasn't just anyone, that she was a student, a volunteer, a woman fighting to build something out of the ashes she'd inherited. But she knew the rules. Her story didn't matter here. Not to them. At the Langston table, Richard's desperation was reaching its peak. He bounced Theo harder, his voice cracking as he murmured, "Please, buddy, please." The sound wasn't just a father soothing his child. It was a man pleading with the universe to give him back what he had lost. Amara's feet moved before her mind caught up. One step, then another. The silver tray trembled in her hand. Every eye in the restaurant was waiting for the next move. And Amara knew if she crossed that last stretch of carpet, nothing about this night, or her life, would be the same again. Amara set her tray down on a nearby table with deliberate calm, though her pulse thundered in her ears. Each step toward Richard's table felt like walking into a storm she hadn't chosen, but couldn't turn away from. The whispers rose instantly. Is she seriously? What does she think she's doing? Unbelievable. "Stay in your lane!" The voices cut sharply, their judgment curling through the air like smoke. Amara forced her chin level, her expression neutral, though her insides trembled. She'd learned long ago that any show of defiance would only confirm what people already assumed about her. Dignity. Always dignity. Richard looked up as she approached. His eyes bloodshot, his hair slightly undone from running frantic fingers through it. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her as a waitress. He just saw a stranger closing in on his pain. "Sir," Amara said softly, her voice steady despite the weight of the room pressing down on her. "May I help?" Richard blinked, caught between offense and surrender. He was used to being the one who offered solutions, not the one who needed them. He won't stop. I don't know what else to—" His voice broke, the sentence shattering mid-air. Theo's cries pierced again, raw and jagged. Drawing groans from a corner table, Amara lowered herself slightly, eye level with the child. Her training whispered in her mind, "Don't rush, don't force, just be." One of the diners sneered audibly. "She probably thinks babysitting is part of her tip." Laughter followed, cruel and small. Richard's jaw clenched. The humiliation he'd been swallowing all evening curdled into shame and anger. He wanted to snap, to silence them, but Theo's wails kept pulling him under. Amara didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. "He's grieving, aren't you, little one?" Richard stiffened. The words hit deeper than he expected, too close to the truth he'd been avoiding. Theo hiccuped, his cries stumbling into ragged sobs. His tiny fist trembled against his father's chest. Amara extended her hands slowly, palms open, patient. "May I?" The room seemed to hold its breath, Richard's eyes locked on hers. A billionaire, stripped bare of every defense, staring at a waitress offering the one thing he couldn't buy: peace. And in that suspended moment, the decision teetered, between pride and surrender, between control and trust. The transfer was awkward at first. Richard's stiff arms, Theo's wriggling body, the sheer disbelief on every watching face. But the moment Amara gathered the infant close to her chest, her entire posture shifted. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't the help, she was a caretaker, a guardian. She pressed Theo gently against her shoulder, her hand moving in slow circles on his back. No frantic bouncing, no rushed shushing, just presence, steady, patient. She breathed deeply, letting him feel the rise and fall of her chest. Her rhythm calm where his had been chaos, the cries sputtered. Theo hiccuped once, twice. His tiny fists loosened, his body melting into her warmth as though he had been waiting for this all night, for someone to be still with him simply. Within seconds, the wails that had dominated the room fell into silence. Mason Lennox froze, forks hovered mid-air. Glasses poised inches from lips. The jazz trio in the corner faltered, their instruments holding a suspended note, as if the whole restaurant had forgotten how to breathe. Richard stared, his mouth parting in disbelief. Hours of desperation, hundreds of failed attempts, and she had done it in less than a minute. Amara kept humming softly, a tune without words, something she remembered from campfires at grief camp. Theo's eyelids fluttered, his body surrendering to a fragile, exhausted peace. Whispers rippled across the tables. How did she— It's a trick. Babies stop sometimes. Lucky timing, that's all. Richard's throat tightened. He wanted to defend her, to shout that it wasn't luck, but he didn't even know what she had done himself. All he knew was that his son was finally, blessedly quiet. And yet, instead of gratitude, a new kind of tension curled through the room. The stares sharpened, not softer but colder, as if Amara's quiet triumph had somehow insulted them all. At the far end of the dining room, a voice muttered, dripping venom. "Of course. Hand the baby to the maid. That's all they're good for." Amara's shoulders tensed. Richard's eyes snapped toward the sound. The silence was over. A new storm was beginning. Richard's hands rested on the table, fingers curled, knuckles white. He could barely comprehend what had just happened. Hours of frustration and helplessness were undone in mere moments by a young waitress whose name he barely knew. How did you— he started, voice low, hesitant. But Amara didn't answer immediately. She adjusted Theo in her arms, keeping her tone calm, measured. "Shh, it's okay," she murmured. Not just to the baby, but almost as if to him too, her presence a balm against the chaos of the night. Richard swallowed. He wanted to speak, to offer money, to command recognition, but no words came. He realized suddenly that money had never done this. Status had never done this. Nothing he had amassed in his life could quiet a child like her had. Meanwhile, Amara felt every eye in the room slicing toward her. The whispers grew bolder, eyes narrowing, muttered indignation rippling like a wave. She thinks she can just... Unbelievable. Let the professionals handle it, but she held steady. She had been underestimated before. She had faced condescension, subtle racism, and outright dismissal countless times, and yet here she was. Every ounce of training, every long night of study, every moment holding grieving children in her arms had led to this. She would not flinch. Richard leaned closer, curiosity mixing with awe. You do this often? His voice was quieter now, almost tentative. Amara glanced up, eyes calm, lips tight. I've worked with kids who've lost everything. It teaches you patience and presence. He frowned, trying to reconcile the polished, composed woman in front of him with the storm of judgment surrounding her. And yet, he thought, she's the only one who can see what Theo needs. The murmurs escalated again. At table 5, a man's voice rose just enough for the room to catch. If she's so smart, why isn't she somewhere respectable? Why here? Amara's grip on Theo didn't falter. Richard noticed the quiet dignity in her posture, the way her eyes didn't dart away, the way she faced the room without fear. A shiver ran down his spine. In all his life, he had commanded respect. But this woman commanded something else, something he had never encountered, trust. And then a new, sharp sound cut across the dining room, a baby crying again from another table, triggered by Theo's brief stirring. The hush shattered. Richard looked at Amara. Uncertainty and hope tangled in his eyes. Would she rise to the challenge again? The new cry sliced through the air, sharp and high-pitched, like a sudden alarm. Heads turned, forks clattered. Theo stirred in Amara's arms, startled by the sudden chaos. Richard's chest tightened again, panic threatening to reclaim him. Amara didn't flinch. She whispered, rocking him just enough for Theo to recognize her rhythm. Her other hand rested lightly on his back, a steady, grounding presence. Slowly, deliberately, the baby's trembling subsided. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. A few diners leaned forward, eyes wide, as if the act were magic rather than patience and care. Some looked embarrassed, as though they had underestimated her too quickly. Others scowled, mouths pressed tight in disapproval. Richard stared in disbelief. Every expensive strategy, every calculated decision in his life had prepared him for negotiations, acquisitions, crises. But this quiet, deliberate grace, this presence, was something he had never learned. And it was working. Amara hummed a soft tune, her voice blending with the fading jazz. Theo's cries dissolved into small whimpers, then nothing. His tiny body relaxed completely against her shoulder. Richard exhaled, almost forgetting he'd been holding him moments before. A whisper from the corner cut sharply. Unbelievable. She's just a waitress. How can she do this? Another voice muttered, bitter and thin. Some people just shouldn't be trusted with children. Amara's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't let her eyes falter. Each microaggression was a wave, and she was a rock. She had faced worse. She had survived worse. She could survive this. Richard's eyes softened, a quiet admiration building beneath the shock. He reached for Theo, almost instinctively, but Amara's steady hold gave him pause. She wasn't just holding a child, she was holding the room's judgment, the weight of expectation, the unspoken biases pressed against her. And she was doing it effortlessly. Theo's eyelids drooped, a small yawn escaping him. The Billionaire CEO finally allowed himself to breathe, marveling silently at the woman who had just done what he could not. Amara glanced at Richard, her expression calm but serious. This isn't over. Not tonight, and in the hush that followed, every eye in the restaurant lingered on her, some in awe, some in disdain, but all transfixed. The quiet had settled, but the storm of judgment had only paused. Would she withstand it? Could she hold this fragile piece in the face of scrutiny that seemed determined to unravel it? Richard's eyes never left Amara. The calm authority in her movements, the gentle way she responded to Theo's every flinch, contrasted sharply with the chaos of the room. He had seen managers, therapists, even high-paid nannies try and fail. And yet here she was, achieving in minutes what others hadn't in hours. You've worked with grieving children before? He asked quietly, hesitant to break the delicate balance she had created. Amara nodded without looking up. Yes, a summer camp for children who have lost a parent. You learn quickly that a child doesn't need words. They need presence, someone to sit with them, feel with them. Richard exhaled slowly. He felt a pang of humility. He had fought battles in boardrooms, argued with powerful CEOs, made decisions worth millions, yet this, a child's comfort, was beyond his reach. And she, a young woman barely older than some of his interns, wielded it effortlessly. The diners continued to whisper, some with awe, others with thinly veiled contempt. How does she do that? Probably some trick. Show off. Amara felt it all, the weight of eyes, the sting of words meant to belittle. And still she remained composed. Each microaggression was a reminder, not a barrier. She had survived worse. Every time someone underestimated her, she had risen above it. Tonight would be no different. Theo yawned, a soft sigh escaping him as he curled closer into her arms. Richard watched, mesmerized. There was a rhythm here, a quiet dance between caregiver and child, and in that rhythm he saw something deeper. Grace, patience, an unspoken strength born of experience and empathy. I don't know how to thank you, Richard said finally, his voice low, tinged with awe. I've never seen anyone... He trailed off, words failing. Amara glanced up, eyes meeting his. You don't need to thank me. Be here for him. That's what matters. The room seemed to hold its breath. Patrons shifted uneasily, some leaning back in discomfort at seeing a young black woman command respect through compassion rather than wealth or status. And then, a sharp, sneering voice cut through. Don't let him think this makes you important. You're just the help. Richard's chest tightened. The world's assumptions pressed in, threatening to undo everything she had accomplished in mere minutes. Amara felt the sting but did not falter. She looked down at Theo, then back at Richard, and in that instant, both knew nothing would ever be the same again. The murmurs swelled again, louder this time. Chairs scraped against the polished floor, a couple of diners shifting uncomfortably, whispering just loud enough to be heard. She thinks she can handle a billionaire's child? Incredible. Who does she think she is? Amara didn't flinch. Each word, each glance was another test she had faced countless times before. She tightened her hold on Theo just slightly, rocking him in measured circles, humming softly. The child's breathing evened, his eyelids drooping in trust. Richard felt a pang of awe that caught him off guard. He had dealt with hostile boards, cutthroat rivals, and media scrutiny. Still, nothing had prepared him for this. A young woman standing her ground in the face of prejudice, holding his son and commanding not authority, but respect. He realized sharply that he had never truly seen someone like her before. The wealth, the titles, the glossy veneers of power, they meant nothing here. She was operating on a different level, one that couldn't be bought or commanded. Empathy, skill, grace. Amara, he said softly, his voice steady but low, almost intimate in its intensity. I don't know how you do it. How do you make him stop like that? She glanced at him briefly, her calm eyes meeting his. It's not about stopping him. It's about listening, feeling him, letting him know he's not alone. That's all any of us really need. The words struck deeper than Richard expected. He looked down at Theo, now finally quiet, his tiny fingers curling around Amara's thumb. A flush of gratitude and humility rose in him, but the room was far from pacified. A couple of diners whispered with thinly veiled scorn, and the tension in the air thickened like fog. Their judgmental eyes bore into Amara, testing her, daring her to falter. She didn't. Richard felt a surge of protective instinct mixed with admiration. He realized in that moment that he was watching something rare, not a display of obedience, not a performance, but true mastery of human connection. And then came the moment, the silent pause before the next wave of challenge. Would the room accept this? Could he fully trust her with Theo beyond this moment, beyond the judgments of everyone around them? The answer hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. And in that fragile pause, Richard Langston knew that the night had only just begun and that everything was about to change. Richard took a slow breath and shifted his stance. Every instinct screamed caution, pride, control, but he saw what Amara had accomplished. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to release his grip on Theo entirely. "Here," he said quietly, voice steady. "He's yours for now, please." Amara's eyes flicked to his, calm and unshaken. "Thank you," she replied softly, accepting the child with careful hands. She held him close, rocking him in a rhythm that seemed almost instinctive, as if she were reading not just his movements but his very emotions. Theo's tiny hands reached up and brushed her cheek, and Richard's chest tightened. Something shifted in him, an acknowledgement that this wasn't just babysitting. This was care. Genuine, transformative care, the diners whispered, some in awe, some in thinly veiled contempt. "She's amazing. I can't believe it. Still, just a waitress." Amara felt it all, yet she remained composed, her calm unshakable. Each microaggression was like a wave lapping against a sturdy cliff, unable to erode her foundation. She hummed softly, letting Theo feel the warmth and presence he had been craving, and slowly, imperceptibly, the room began to settle. Richard watched, mesmerized. He had spent his life measuring success in profits, acquisitions, and influence. And yet here was a young woman, with nothing but patience, skill, and empathy, achieving something far more profound than anything money could buy. "Thank you," he whispered again. More to himself than to her, Amara glanced up, offering a faint, knowing smile. It was a quiet acknowledgement. She understood the stakes, the unspoken judgments, and the power dynamics, but she moved beyond them, as she always had. Then, from across the room, a sharp laugh cut through the tension. A diner leaned back, smug. "Well, we'll see how long this lasts. Won't be long before she can't handle him." Richard's chest tightened, but instead of fear, he felt resolve. He had seen enough to know her worth, and the night had just begun. Amara held Theo closer, and in that suspended moment, the story shifted. The battle wasn't over, but a bond had been forged, fragile yet unbreakable, and in the silence that followed, the stage was set. Everything that came next would change their lives forever. The room had gone from tense to brittle, like glass stretched too thin. Every diner held their breath, some out of curiosity, some out of judgment. Richard Langston leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, observing the unfolding scene with a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. Amara rocked Theo gently, humming softly, her voice a thread of calm through the charged atmosphere. The baby's small hands clutched at her blouse, his cries reduced to soft murmurs. Every motion she made was precise, deliberate, yet effortless, as if she had rehearsed it 1,000 times in her mind. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere in the room. A waiter cleared his throat nervously. The whispers began again, louder this time. "She's incredible. No one should be able to do that." "I don't believe it." But not all eyes were admiring. A wealthy couple at the corner table exchanged glances that cut through the air, their disapproval palpable. "How dare she handle his child? She's nothing." Richard's jaw tightened. Usually he would have silenced them, asserted control, but something in him hesitated. He watched Amara, calm, unflinching, and realized that no command or wealth could replicate what she was doing. "This wasn't authority, it was mastery of the human heart. Amara," he said softly, voice barely audible over the murmurs. How are you doing this?" She glanced at him, eyes steady, and for a moment the room seemed to vanish. "I listen," she said. "I feel him. He knows he's not alone. That's all he needs." Theo hiccuped and burrowed closer, tiny fists relaxed. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Richard's lips. The contrast was striking, The billionaire, a man who had commanded industries, powerless against his son's grief, and the young waitress, standing firm in her dignity, wielding nothing but presence. The murmurs rose again, now tinged with disbelief and envy. "I've never seen anything like it. She can't last. This is just luck. Who does she think she is?" One diner, bold enough, laughed aloud. "Give her a medal, why don't you? Oh, wait. She's just a waitress." Amara's eyes flicked to the voice, but she didn't respond. She adjusted Theo's position, keeping him snug against her chest. Every microaggression, every slur, every dismissive glance hit her like a wave, but she had learned to stand firm against storms far worse. Richard's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, defend her, recognize her for what she was, more than just a waitress. But the words caught in his throat. And then it happened. Theo yawned, stretching his tiny arms. His cries had ended completely. The entire room fell silent, as if time itself paused to witness it. Richard exhaled, disbelief and relief mingling in equal measure. His son was quiet, completely. Every eye in Maison Lennox shifted toward Amara. Some are in awe, some in grudging respect, others unsettled, their assumptions challenged in a way they hadn't anticipated. Richard realized sharply that what she had done tonight was more than soothing a child. She had disrupted expectations, shattered social hierarchies, and revealed a truth many were unwilling to face. Dignity, skill, and grace are not confined to wealth, status, or title. He felt a swell of something unfamiliar. Humility. And gratitude. The storm of judgment had not vanished. It had only paused, waiting for the next move, and Richard Langston knew in the depths of his chest that he would never forget this night, and the woman who had forever changed it. The room seemed frozen. Theo's soft breathing, the quiet hum from Amara, and the distant jazz from the corner all blended into a tense, fragile stillness. Every patron's eyes were fixed on her, some with awe, some with disbelief, some with thinly veiled disdain. Then a sharp, deliberate clap echoed from the back of the dining room. A voice followed, deep, authoritative, laced with surprise. "Well, I'll be damned!" Heads turned. A man in a tailored suit stood, slightly leaning on his cane, eyes wide. Even the staff froze. "It's not just luck," Richard said quietly, almost to himself. "She's remarkable." Amara looked up, meeting his gaze, but didn't break her rhythm. Theo's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, trusting, unafraid. She rocked him gently, humming a faint tune. The diners whispered nervously, sensing something extraordinary unfolding. Is he recognizing her?" "No one commands attention like that." Richard cleared his throat, louder this time, his voice steady. "Everyone listen." The room went silent instantly. Even the jazz trio paused mid-note. "This young woman has done what none of us could. She calmed my son, not with money, not with status, not with authority, but with care, presence, and patience." A ripple of disbelief swept through the crowd. Eyes widened, some mouths gaping. One diner muttered bitterly, "A waitress. Teaching a billionaire?" Richard ignored them. He took a deep breath and looked at Amara, truly seeing her for the first time, not as staff, not as someone beneath him, but as a person of skill, dignity, and immense humanity. "Amara Johnson," he said clearly, "I want you to work with Theo full-time. Not as a favor, not as a token. Because you're extraordinary. And because my son and my family deserve someone like you." A stunned silence fell. Then Theo yawned, stretching in Amara's arms, as if approving the announcement himself. Whispers became louder, some impressed, some outraged. "He's offering her a job? Seriously? This is unprecedented?" Amara's lips curved into a small, serene smile. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't asked for it. But she accepted it with the quiet dignity that had carried her through years of microaggressions, subtle slights, and outright prejudice. Richard felt a strange warmth, a weight lifting from his chest. In her presence, he realized, actual power wasn't in money, influence, or intimidation. It was in grace, care, and empathy. The diners shifted, some uncomfortable, some reflective. The elite social sphere had been disrupted, their assumptions challenged, their biases exposed in a single, quiet act. And in the center of it all, Amara held Theo, small, calm, and utterly unconquerable. The night had shifted. The rules had changed. And nothing, not wealth, not status, not privilege, could diminish what had just happened. The room felt electric, charged with disbelief. Every eye was fixed on Amara and Theo. The whispers had turned into murmurs of admiration, of shock, of barely contained judgment. The elite diners, used to controlling every room they entered, now had no control at all. Richard stepped closer, his voice calm but firm, echoing in the hushed restaurant. No one here saw what happened the way I did. Amara didn't just quiet my son. She calmed my entire world. And she did it with nothing but patience, skill, and care. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some diners stiffened, refusing to believe that a young black server could earn that kind of recognition. Others, quieter, exchanged glances, awed and humbled. Amara's eyes met Richard's, and he saw it. A mixture of pride and humility. A quiet acknowledgement of all the times she had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. She hadn't needed validation before. But now, she had it in a way that could never be taken away. Theo stirred slightly in her arms, reaching for Richard instinctively. Richard knelt, brushing the baby's soft hair back. "You're extraordinary, Theo," he whispered, voice thick. "But you're lucky, because she's even more extraordinary?" Amara smiled faintly, but her gaze swept the room. Every whisper, every judgmental stare had followed her from the moment she entered. Yet she held herself steady, every line of her posture radiating calm authority. Then came the final twist, a subtle one, yet breathtaking. One of the diners, a wealthy socialite known for her biting sarcasm, had scoffed loudly earlier. She now approached, eyes wide, mouth pressed tight. I underestimated you," she admitted, voice shaky. I thought someone like you wouldn't handle this." Amara tilted her head slightly, studying her, calm and unreadable. "It's not about who I am," she said softly. "It's about being present. That's all any of us can give." Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. He had always believed that influence, wealth, and status were what changed lives. Tonight, he had been proven wrong. Presence, empathy, care. They were the true forces of transformation. The room finally exhaled as if released from tension. Conversations resumed, slower now, softer. The judgment had not disappeared, but respect had been carved into its edges. Richard looked at Amara, truly seeing her for the first time. "I want you in our lives, not because you work here, not because it's convenient, but because you've earned it, in a way none of us could have imagined." Theo yawned, stretching lazily in her arms. Amara's calm presence radiated outward, touching not just him, but Richard, and even the room itself. The final emotional spike hit Richard full force, gratitude, humility, and awe. His son was safe. His family, though fractured, was beginning to heal, and the world around them, biased, judgmental, unforgiving, had just been reminded that dignity, grace, and human connection could never be bought or measured. The climax had reached its zenith. Every gaze, every whisper, every heart in the room had shifted, and in that moment, Richard knew nothing would ever be the same. The whispers faded, replaced by a strange calm, as if the restaurant itself had been transformed. The ambient jazz resumed, softer now, as though it too had witnessed what had just unfolded. Patrons lingered in their chairs, sipping wine, some embarrassed, some contemplative. The judgment had not disappeared entirely, but a seed had been planted. Respect had been earned most unexpectedly. Richard Langston exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders releasing for the first time that evening. Theo, now peaceful in Amara's arms, had finally surrendered to a rest he had been denied for hours. Watching the child's chest rise and fall, he felt a deep, unspoken gratitude, not just for quiet, but for understanding. for someone who had stepped into his world and shown him the power of human presence. "Amara," he said quietly, stepping closer, voice low and sincere. "I mean what I said earlier. I want you with us, not as staff, not as a token, but because you belong here. You've shown me more about patience, grace, and real strength than anyone else in my life." Amara's eyes met his, and for a moment a subtle warmth passed between them. She hadn't expected this recognition, hadn't sought it, but she accepted it, not with pride, but with quiet dignity. She nodded once firmly, a silent acknowledgement that she would step into this new role with care, professionalism, and the same empathy that had calmed Theo. Over the following weeks, the bond between them deepened. Richard watched as Amara engaged with Theo, not as a wealthy CEO watching over a project, but as a father learning to be present, learning to listen. Her methods were simple, yet profound. Gentle touch, calm presence, and unwavering patience. Slowly, Theo began to smile more, to trust the rhythms of his father's world as mediated through her steady guidance. The social barriers, once so rigid in Maison Lennox and the spaces Richard frequented, began to feel smaller. Patrons who had once sneered now watched with quiet admiration when Amara entered the room, realizing that skill, grace, and humanity were not defined by class, status, or skin color. Richard himself began to see the world differently, not through the lens of power and wealth, but through empathy and shared vulnerability. Even more, they discovered shared grief as a bridge. Richard mourned the wife he had lost. Amara carried the loss of her mother. Together, their conversations revealed the universality of pain, the healing power of presence, and the strength found in acknowledging emotions rather than hiding behind pride or wealth. For Theo, the impact was immediate. Laughter returned to the small apartment they shared, nap times became predictable, and the child's eyes, once filled with constant distress, now glimmered with trust. Richard had gained a partner not just in childcare but in understanding his son, and Amara found purpose, validation, and a sense of belonging that transcended the limits imposed by society. The ripple extended beyond their personal lives. Social media whispers, discreet yet persistent, began to celebrate Amara's dignity and skill, while conversations in elite circles quietly shifted. The night that had begun as tension and judgment ended as a subtle revolution in awareness, a reminder that true strength often lies in care, empathy, and courage, the quiet kind that transforms lives without fanfare. Richard finally realized what had been missing in his life: presence, patience, and genuine human connection. And he found it in Amara, a young woman he had underestimated, a child he had struggled to soothe, and a moment that changed them all forever. As the city lights of Manhattan shimmered outside the restaurant windows, a new rhythm settled inside their lives. One of trust, respect, and healing. One that would shape not only a family, but the world around them. Sometimes the most potent acts in the world are the quietest. Amara Johnson didn't need wealth, authority, or recognition to transform a moment, a family, and even a room full of judgmental eyes. Her power came from presence, empathy, and a steady heart. She reminded us that true strength isn't always visible, it lives in patience, in dignity, and in the courage to show up fully, even when others doubt you. Richard Langston, a billionaire CEO accustomed to control and influence, learned a lesson money could never buy. Vulnerability and care are what connect us most deeply. He discovered that a child's comfort, a family's healing, and the transformation of hearts often come not from status or privilege, but from genuine human connection. Theo's cries were silenced not by toys, luxuries, or status symbols, but by someone who listened, who was fully present, and who treated him with respect and understanding. The story also shines a light on the unseen labor of individuals often overlooked. Amara's work, experience, and empathy were not immediately apparent, yet they held the power to change lives. It's a reminder that countless acts of care, dignity, and grace happen every day, quietly shaping the world around us, often without applause or recognition. The most profound truth is this: shared vulnerability can bridge the widest divides. Richard and Amara came from different worlds, shaped by various experiences. Yet grief, patience, and empathy allowed them to find common ground. Their bond reminds us that humanity transcends social hierarchies, prejudice, and expectation. Sometimes the most unlikely people can teach us the greatest lessons. So, take a moment to reflect. Look around you. Who in your life embodies quiet strength, compassion, and presence? Whose contributions, often invisible, hold the power to change lives? Because it's not just billionaires or public heroes who can shape the world, it's anyone willing to show up fully, to care deeply, and to act with dignity. What if this happened in your workplace, school, or neighborhood? What would you do? Would you notice the quiet hero in your midst, or let the moment pass? Share your thoughts in the comments. Honor the unseen acts of kindness around you. Recognize the power of presence, and let this story inspire you to hold space for others, even when the world seems loud, judgmental, or unfair. Sometimes, the smallest act of grace is the one that changes everything.